Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon. I'm filling in for Alan Schimmel, and welcome to another episode of TechStrong TV. Today is Thursday, December 10th. We have a great lineup of interviews, mostly new, a couple old ones, but all very, very interesting and totally worth your time today. So first up, we have an interview between Alan and Tim Callan of Sectigo. They talk about the two acquisitions Sectigo recently made in the SSL space to help it expand into other markets. The first one is called SSL 24/7. That will help the organization expand into the UK and France markets, and then the company also acquired a company called Zolfin, which is based in the Netherlands and looking to expand more into that space as well. So they have a really interesting conversation about what Sectigo's plans are with the acquisition of those two companies and its quest for global dominance. Next up, we have an interview between Alan and Steve Tack of Dynatrace. And Dynatrace recently had a new announcement regarding new capabilities. Based on its observability platform, they're adding some application security capabilities to it. It's a continuous runtime application self-protection capability that works on applications both in production and pre-production, and it's optimized for Kubernetes and DevSecOps processes. Good stuff. Alan and Steve have a great information-filled conversation about the new capabilities at Dynatrace. All right, after that, in our Something Old segment for the week, we have a previously run episode of the Cyber Hero Adventure Show with Gary Berman. He has a conversation with Jeff Schaefer from Aon Cyber Solutions and Francis Cianfroca and Curtis Blount of Insight Cyber. They have just a fascinating conversation about cybersecurity in general. Lots of different topics that they cover, so definitely a conversation worth checking out. After that, I do the headlines for the day, and then I have a conversation with a gentleman by the name of Casey Ellis of Bug Crowd. He and I have a conversation about ethical hacking. Ethical hacking has been kind of on a lot of people's minds lately as organizations struggle to deal with their cybersecurity issues related to the pandemic, folks working from home more, hackers and taking advantage of that fact. And as we go into the holiday season, retailers and e-commerce sites are having issues with hackers and data breaches and trying to prevent that. So we have a conversation about how those organizations can use ethical hacking to improve their security posture. We also have a conversation about what ethical hacking, where it is, where the space is right now, and the changing in attitudes toward ethical hacking in general. So good stuff that it's just a really great conversation. We do, after that, I have a quick preview for you for the webinars that we have coming up. And then Mitch Ashley comes in and has a conversation with Sumit Thakar of Qualys. He's the President and Chief Product Officer. And Badri Raghunathan, who is the Director of Product Management for Container Security at Qualys. They talk about Qualys's new container runtime security offering, which it actually just announced in November 2020. That's got a lot of really, really great features, including policy-driven security monitoring, detection and blocking of container behavior at runtime. Good stuff for the container security crowd, and definitely a conversation you want to have if you are using containers in your environments. And so the conversation that Mitch has with the folks at Qualys is definitely one worth checking out. All right, lots of stuff. Jam-packed 2 hours or so I hope everybody can settle in and watch today's show. But we'll break first for a commercial, and then we'll get right to it. right, welcome back, everybody. Kicking off today's conversations, we have Alan speaking with Tim Callan of Sectigo about Sectigo's recent acquisitions to help it advance in the European space. So let's give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. We're here for another TechStrong TV interview. My guest for this section is Tim Callan. Tim is Chief Compliance Officer at Sectigo. Hey Tim, welcome to TechStrong TV. How are you?
Alan, I'm doing well and I'm happy to be here.
Great. Tim, you know, Sectigo is one of those names where people say, I know those guys. But, you know, there's been name changes in the past and stuff like that. They really do know you, even if they don't 100% sure of how they know you. Why don't we start there? Give us a little of the Sectigo, corporate history, family history there.
That's a great place to start, Alan. I'm glad you're asking about that. So for nearly 2 decades, the business that is now Sectigo was known as Comodo, as the Comodo certificate business. And Comodo started as a public CA in the early 2000s. It's one of the oldest public CAs there is. And in late 2017, we carved our company out of Comodo. So the company Comodo kept going forward. It had other products. And what we did is we carved out the digital certificate business as its own separate entity. And so originally completely separate in every way, different ownership, different legal status, different offices, different personnel, just entirely separated. And so in the beginning, for the first year, we operated under the name Comodo CA to try to differentiate ourselves from Comodo. But we always knew from day one that we were going to need a new name. And so exactly 1 year in, on November 1, 2018, we rebranded the company to Sectigo and put a lot of effort in the intervening time, and we'll keep putting effort into educating the market to understand what Sectigo means, and that Sectigo has been in this business and doing this for almost 20 years.
Absolutely. Good. All right, we've got that out of the way. Let's next. You know, when we talk about the digital certificate business, Tim, and we've been lucky enough to have many different players within the certificate space, you know, come here, everyone from Google on down. So our audience is familiar, but just to remind, or maybe those people who aren't, today, when we talk about digital certificates, you know, we're talking about identity certificates, not just of people, right, of which there are, you know, billions on the internet, but every server instance needs a certificate. Every of the billions of IoT devices out there, the refrigerator, the toaster, the washing machine, all of them.
Every virtual machine.
Every cloud instance.
Right? So if you're using a containerized environment, if you're using microservices, every single container needs its own certificate. Every person, every email account, every device, not just servers, but also client machines, you know, laptops, mobile devices.
And endpoints, all that, So, I mean, not to get all Carl Sagan-ish, but we are really talking about billions and billions, right?
We absolutely are. It's, you know, there certainly are more active digital certificates out there, if you consider all types of certificates, than there are people, right? It's just
many times.
Yes. And it's foundational, right? Like at the end of the day, the only way that you can have a machine or a process be reliably talking in our interconnected world, communicating with other things, and not worry about various forms of spoofing attack is if you have strong identity associated with every one of those devices or every one of those processes. And today, you know, more than 40 years after it was invented, PKI is still the only solution we have to do that. So PKI and digital certificates are fundamental to the way all of our systems operate. If there was a wizard who could make all PKI disappear, everything we have, all of our computerized services would just stop working.
Agreed. Yeah. And it's also a little bit of don't fix what's not broke. But,
right.
All right. So I think Tim, we've done a great job here of a brief history of everything certificate related, right? Recently, you guys broke some news. You made some acquisitions. I think it was last week, right?
We did, and we made a pair of acquisitions in close proximity, so we decided to announce them together in a single announcement. And what we did was we acquired two of the largest providers of digital certificates. Now, note, these aren't public CAs, but these are people who have customer relationships and actually provide the certificates to the customers. Two of the largest providers of digital certificates in Europe. So that was SSL 24/7 and Zolphin, XOLPHIN. And the reason we did that acquisition, Alan, was we really wanted to beef up our in-market sales capabilities. The company historically has a strong legacy in North America, and we wanted to replicate that in Europe as well in order to, just leave ourselves better positioned to serve the market.
Fair enough. Absolutely. You know what? Just to go back to a little elementary stuff for our audience. When we talk about a public certificate authority,
Right.
we're talking about a company like Sectigo that actually issues these certificates. That is the authority, that public-private key infrastructure, right?
Yes.
And that's what Sectigo is, a certificate authority. The companies you bought, at some level, could be described as resellers of these certificates, but they have, like in many industries, they own the customer, so to speak, right? They have that customer channel.
Absolutely, and that's really what we wanted. So yes, we're the public CA. We are the people who have trusted roots that are sitting in the major browsers and operating systems, without which you can't issue public certificates. We also have a certain level of certificate and PKI expertise that is specific to that market and that industry that's very specialized and is important to have. What they have, which is really great, is they have a lot of customer relationships. They have excellent sales and service people. So they have customers who don't just buy from them, but look to them to be their expert advisors, look to them to tell them what's going on in the market, what they need to worry about, and look to them to help their problems. And so, again, that's what we wanted. We have had a relationship with either of these companies for well over a decade. And their knowledge is excellent. Their abilities are excellent. Their customer relationships are excellent. And that's all of that DNA that we wanted to bring in.
Excellent. Not to overuse the word excellent, but Tim, that makes a heck of a lot of sense to us. And so what equivalent, so that both of these companies cover Europe.
Yeah.
Are there like similar companies, like for instance, in North America, it's Sectigo themselves who are selling it, right? You don't have a separate but in other parts of the world, there's similar kind of companies that do kind of have these channels.
There are. I mean, so if you think about it, there are actually a lot of public CAs in the world, but it's a pretty short list that is providing most of those certificates. You could probably come up with a list of 4 or 5 public CAs that are providing, 90+% of the certificates, the public certs that are being used. And, each of these companies is headquartered in one country, right? And there are, nearly 200 countries in the world. So what happens in all the other ones? And to some degree, you can have direct sales and support, but there are robust certificate sales communities all over the world, and there are providers all over the world. And name any country, and there's an in-country specialist.
Yep, that's pretty much how it goes.
Yeah,
good stuff. All right. First of all, so congratulations on these acquisitions, Tim.
Thank you.
From an integration point of view, what do you think's involved there, if anything?
It's not bad. There's some things you got to learn what everybody's doing and make sure that everybody knows where they sit in the org structure and all that stuff. There's a little bit of, process things, but even then, that has been covered by virtue of the fact that we've had a direct relationship with these companies for a long time. So I'll define another term for you. You said what a CA was, a certificate authority. There's also a concept called an RA, or a registration authority. And an RA is somebody who does a lot of the authentication work for the CA and then hands the actual issuance off to the CA. And Zolfin has been an RA for us. And Zolfin has actually gone through audits. They call them web trust audits to ensure that they're doing things correctly. And so, you think about the close relationship that you have there, and you already have people who understand the processes. You already have systems. So again, that's another one part of what made this make sense is, in a way, it's like they were already part of the family. And so that made things much easier.
Absolutely. Got it. So Tim, congratulations, as I said, on the
Thank
acquisitions. That's great from a Sectigo go-to-market. Let's talk a little bit about the whole certificate world. As we sit here, it's December of 2020. It's certainly been an unusual year, to say the least, for most of our audience and for most of the human species. What is 2020? Any specific challenges in dealing with certificates in Sectigo?
Yeah, so the certificate world in general had to deal with some real unprecedented things. And I'll go back to something we just talked about, web trust audits. So historically, the way the audit works is the auditors show up in your facilities and they walk around and they inspect things with their eyes, and they look at systems and they get reports, and all of that is done in person. And the way those audits are written, the rules are written for these things to be done in person. And so, these are standards. These are dictated practices that you can't just go and adjust on the fly. So all of a sudden, we had a whole industry that had to deal with the fact that our rules say that our audits have to be conducted in person, but they can't be conducted in person, right? And so that sort of thing happens. Or key signing ceremonies is another incident that goes on where it gets real techy, but basically you go to a certain facility, you're there in the knock, you've got your hardware security modules, and you go through the exercise of creating your keys, your key pairs, your public-private key pairs, and they have to be done in a certain way or they're just not secure. And historically, these have depended on people being physically in buildings. And suddenly people being physically in buildings might be a little harder than we've all been used to. And this is the kind of things that people don't think about. We go, oh, it's 2020. It's all in the cloud. Like, well, okay, that cloud exists somewhere, right? There are servers on racks somewhere in the world. And that still has to be dealt with. And if you're a CA, you've got real specific needs that have to be met in a real specific way. And if they're not, first of all, you might not be safe and secure. And second of all, you might not be compliant. And those are both issues that really need to be dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you do?
You work through it, right? So fortunately, we weren't the only ones, right? There was a whole industry. And so a bunch of these things were adjusted in a bunch of different ways. So for example, the CA Browser Forum is the body that meets to sort of agree on rules around public certificates. The CA Browser Forum had 3 face-to-face meetings every year traditionally, and there'd be one in Asia, one in Europe, one in North America. So the CA Browser Forum has gone 100% virtual. And we had to figure out, how do you do that? How do you make it work? And, technical things and rules of order, and how do you have productive conversations and all of that? And that's what we've been doing. And I frankly don't know if we will go back to face-to-face or if we might continue with the virtual format. We may. And so in every aspect of this specific business, someone has had to sit down and figure out, how are we going to do this and how are we going to make it work?
Makes sense. Okay. Tim, what now? God willing, and this isn't going to stay like this forever, right?
Yeah.
We're making progress, I hope.
Yeah. Yes.
What do you think are the big changes coming up for us in the next, let's get through the first 6 months of 2021. Vaccines are out there. People start whatever normal is. What do you think's coming down the pike?
Well, so I think some of it is that, a lot of the technology trends that were driven by the massive work from home requirement were trends that were going on anyway, right? You see it a strong tendency toward what Gartner likes to call SASE, right? Yep. Software-defined perimeter, zero trust, network access, all of those ideas. Those have been going on for years. They're good ideas. They're things we should do anyway. There was just suddenly this rocket fuel to impel them to move forward in a much faster way than they had done previously. And we consulted with a lot of large enterprises who said, okay, that's it. Everybody's got to have a digital identity, got to happen yesterday. How are we going to get this done and get it done right? And the thing about these enterprises is the pendulum's never going to swing back all the way, right? So now that they have these capabilities and now that it's possible to say, I can have a high degree of assurance that 100% of my employees can work from home and there won't be a problem with that, there will be more of that, right? And so these trends towards SASE and SDP, they're not stopping, right? They're going to continue in 2021. And even when we're all able to go sit in an office again, we're not going to have to. We're not going to have to nearly as much. And that is definitely a trend that we're seeing. It's going on in a big way. It was fueled by COVID, but the root cause wasn't COVID. And so the benefits that it gives us are going to continue to be there.
I think what we see is it's accelerated by COVID, but we're seeing trends that were there.
Yeah, for sure. And then, of course, the other big thing that everyone needs to be aware of is the whole coming quantum cryptography change that needs to happen, right? So this is not going away, and quantum computers are changing the way that cryptography has to be dealt with. Quantum computers are going to be able to solve cryptographic problems that can't be solved by traditional computers. And what it means is that our old-fashioned RSA and ECC crypto can't be our cryptography moving forward. And so there's a whole.
Didn't you and I had a conversation?
We did have a conversation about this.
And so for our audience, that was an amazing conversation, by the way, that I repeated to people for weeks. Go check out on TechStrong TV. Actually, if you go to digitalanarchist.com and put in Tim's name.
Yeah, Tim Callan.
C-A-L-L-A-N,
yes.
Yep. It'll pop up and you'll be able to see it there. It was an amazing conversation about how that is going to change. And
so
you're
that
right.
Continues apace, right? And the clock keeps moving on that. It doesn't care about pandemics. The clock keeps right on moving. And we're all still going to have to swap out all of our cryptography starting as early as next year. And so even starting now, enterprises and interested individuals can begin to sandbox this. There's a thing called a hybrid cert. You can issue a hybrid cert on a private route. You can't do it on a public route yet, but on a private route in your own test environment, you can actually run these things. You can see what they do. You can make sure that they work with your systems. You can find the stuff that breaks. It comes.
Agreed. Tim, we're about out of time, man. Hey,
Alan,
I want to thank you for joining, sharing the news of these two acquisitions to us. Continued success to you and Sectigo. Come back and visit us soon.
Thanks, Alan. It's good to be here.
All right, man. Tim Callan from Sectigo here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, welcome back. We've got next up a discussion between Alan and Steve Tack of Dynatrace. They talk about Dynatrace's latest addition to its observability platform that takes it into the application security space, specifically continuous runtime application self-protection capabilities. So let's give that conversation a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another TechStrong TV segment. Got some interesting developments to talk to you about in this segment. My guest is Steve Tack from Dynatrace. Hey Steve, how are you?
I'm doing well, Alan. How about yourself?
Good. So Steve, you know, for those in our audience who know about Dynatrace, you know, they probably think of them along the lines of maybe mainframe software, software in general, you know, the developer tools kind of software, or maybe ops software. But you're here to tell us about a new and exciting new chapter in the Dynatrace sort of pantheon, if you will. So why don't you do that? But before you do, Steve, a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. So I lead the product team at Dynatrace. So it's an R&D function within the company, but I spend a lot of my time not only internally with where we're taking the offering, but also with customers, our alliance partners, technology vendors, and really out there as much as I can be within the market to understand problems, unmet needs, and what people are looking to accomplish with cloud native technology.
Fantastic. All right. I think we beat the drums enough, Steve. Why don't you tell our audience what's the big news from Dynatrace?
Yeah, the big news, and we're really excited about this, is that, as you said, Dynatrace has been known more in the monitoring and observability space, and we've just entered into the application security market.
Excellent. Excellent. Why? How?
So it's similar to what we've seen as enterprises go to adopt cloud native technology. The existing tools and processes really aren't made for modern environments and the speed that people are trying to drive with Agile. And we made this shift from an on-premises software company to a SaaS service, started 5 years back and have gone through continual reinvention. And our customers, a lot of times, are trying to drag us into the security space, talking about the quality of the data, the fidelity of the data that we had. And we resisted for a while. It was out of focus. It was out about our own transition that we were going through. But through that process, we did come to realize that the existing application security offerings on the market really weren't built for either the speed that people are trying to drive with continual delivery, or they generate some gaps and blind spots when you go into more dynamic multi-cloud environments.
Absolutely. I mean, so Steve, I've been in the security space myself for about 20 years. We called it InfoSec. Now everyone calls it CyberSec. But about, I'm going to say 7 or 8 years ago, AppSec became a huge focus, the focus, right, around security, where a lot of people said, you know, if it wasn't an AppSec, it didn't mean anything. And there's been no shortage of companies and probably tens and hundreds of millions of dollars raised by companies trying to tackle the AppSec issue. You've laid out in a good case for why things are different now. Speed, you know, velocity, and so forth. But why? What makes you, you know, why is Dynatrace building a better mousetrap here, for lack of a better word?
No, it's a great question, and the thing that we found out, and as we were exploring the space, we looked at, you know, the alternatives out there. But one of the strengths we have is that we're actually able to leverage a lot of our core platform capabilities today. So it was not like we had to start from scratch and build back up. There were items that we believe are unique secret sauce items to the Dynatrace platform that lend themselves well. Maybe to share a couple, with you, just to give you a little bit of insight. Yeah. So one challenge that we saw with the traditional approaches to application security was just coverage. How to get the instrumentation embedded throughout the lifecycle of production and pre-production environments. And one of the core patented technologies that we have, we call it the One Agent and Pure Path technologies, but they give automated instrumentation, whether it's a Kubernetes environment, digging directly into and instrumenting the processes running within the containers, but in an automated way without any really manual steps and anything that might slow down that process. Maybe one other example is also as we do for observability purposes, we have a real-time view across any dependencies, all the different software logical components across multi-cloud environments. And we saw that this use that we applied for problem root cause analysis, enriching CMDBs and others on the observability side was really what organizations needed for a real-time precise impact analysis to understand if a distributed transaction was exposed to the internet, if it had access to crown jewel data, things of that nature. So in summary, there are just many items that we've already invested in that are proven out at enterprise scale that we're able to apply and repurpose within an application security use case.
Excellent. Steve, our audience is probably a very unique mix that's kind of perfect for you in that, one large part of our audience is the DevOps audience. DevOps folks, and all that entails, including DevSecOps. And then, another part of our audience is the cyber audience. Well, again, with a heavy emphasis on AppSec and DevSecOps. So they're pretty savvy, they're pretty knowledgeable. Talk to us specifically. We've become conditioned with AppSec stuff where you have static code analysis, dynamic code analysis, IAST, and I forget what that stands for right now, but IAST analysis, web application firewalls, another aspect of AppSec, though, kind of post-deployment.
Sure.
Where does the Dynatrace, new portfolio here, where's that new product? Where does it fit in there?
Yeah. So maybe I can take a swing at that from talking about what we saw in our own process, what we've done with existing customers in their production environments. One of the compelling pains that we found was that they didn't have great insight into what was running in production environments. And it wasn't that their pre-production scanning, whether it be SCA or the static analysis or other areas, aren't sufficient. But there's just such a fast pace of change in terms of not only managing all the different pipelines that they have in pre-production, but what happens when you have a rollback, something is, you don't catch it as you push it back forward into production again, or new attack vectors that are introduced post that scan. So that was kind of what we saw from a really traditional approach to scanning software in pre-production environments. They just weren't able to catch everything that was in a production world. And so then when we looked at the production side, we'd look at things such as, there used to be ways that you could get at it from the network, but with modern encryption, perfect forward secrecy, there's just no way to really look at it from that view. And then I go back once again to the point of people try to go at it from an application standpoint. We had a kind of a first generation of RASP products, but customers were not confident in their ability to run agent instrumentation at speed and at scale, which once again plays back to one of those secret sauce items that Dynatrace has. And so when we look at that market landscape, we do want to be providing value across the life cycle. Of course, if we can help catch problems before they enter into production, all the better. But that blind spot was the inability to really understand what vulnerabilities were potentially in their production environments and be able to catch those on a real-time basis. And so that's where we see the offering kind of fitting within the overall landscape. And definitely DevSecOps is where we see this world heading. Our traditional audience was DevOps, We're still within kind of that same team and ecosystem, but it is a new stakeholder for the Dynatrace audience.
You speak of stakeholders. One of the interesting things I've seen, Steve, in the DevSecOps space is that traditional security companies coming into DevSecOps, shift left, all this stuff, are recognizing that it may be the security stakeholders, the security team whose budget this comes out of, or who has to sign off an approval. But the actual tools themselves are being used by the DevOps folks, not necessarily the security folks.
Yeah.
Is that true with Dynatrace?
Yeah, that's been our experience. So just for context, although we're announcing the offering today, we've been working on it for about 2 years now internally. It's been running internally for about a year in production. And we've been working with early adopting customers in their production environments over the past quarters. And so we've had a chance to see some of those patterns play out. And yeah, we see DevOps and DevSecOps. For them, it's all about how can they maintain speed, how can they deliver these capabilities, but there always is, to your point, that CISO budget that we are working with, and we see the need from their standpoint just a little bit different. So it's a C-suite care about in terms of, are we confident in what's running in our cloud native environments? Are we sure that if there's a potential exploit that we're able to catch it, quantify it, and address it? And so this value proposition plays out on both sides. It is more collaborative, but on one side, it's the confidence and the risk and the compliance mindset, while on the other one, it's let's not let any of that slow us down from really meeting that need of what we want to do from an agile basis.
Fair enough. And this was released actually this past Tuesday. It's Thursday. And so information is up on the Dynatrace website for this?
It is. Any information that you need around, kind of value, recorded demo, walking through those kind of key use cases that we're leading with out of the gate.
Yep. Steve, can you talk to us? How is this priced? Free would be nice, but how is it priced, and how can people get their hands on it that way? What is it going to take?
Yeah, well, so the great thing is we're starting with really going after our existing customers. I mean, it's a natural spot to learn and for the collaborative efforts. And the great thing for them is that this capability is already part of our observability agents in production. So it's literally a feature flag that they flip on, and they'll be able to get that information that brings together the development team and the security teams in one spot. Now, from a pricing and packaging standpoint, a while back, we went with a very simple, transparent mode where we tie to application workload pricing. So similar that you'd get out of a public cloud provider or on-premises OpenShift or something along those lines. So it's really mapped to the RAM or the workload pricing. And then for our existing customers, this is about a 20 to 30% uplift to give them that real-time security view on top of their full stack monitoring capabilities.
Got it. Makes sense. Steve, so you know what they say, you can't be a little bit pregnant when it comes to security. Actually, I don't know if they say that. I made it up. But Steve, where does Dynatrace go from here on security?
Well, that's something I might hold back on just a little bit, but we're really excited about this being just the first step in that overall mission. So we see the runtime and self-protection capabilities to be natural. It's a very strong fit with our insight into applications, but we're excited about expanding that full stack. We really think that Kubernetes is someplace that we'll continue to invest further in. And then also the automation capabilities that we drive within that. So even better than detecting items in production, say using things like automated quality gates to detect these items pre-production so that they never actually get out into the wild and you're able to preempt those problems. So expanded scope, expanded automation, and more full stack insight is what you can expect to see Dynatrace deliver.
Fantastic. Steve, we're about out of time. Congratulations entering the AppSec market. It's a pretty, it's a dynamic market. It's an important market. And God knows we could use good solutions there. So congratulations to you and Dynatrace on that. come back and keep us informed about how things are going, okay?
Will do. Thanks you very much, Alan. Appreciate having the opportunity to share the news here today with you.
No, it's our pleasure to have you on here. Steve Tack from Dynatrace about the very latest AppSec solution in the marketplace from Dynatrace. Go check it out. Until then, though, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with our next guest. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
All right, welcome back, everybody. In today's Something Old segment, we have a Cyber Hero Adventures show with Gary Berman. He speaks with Jeff Schaefer from Aon Cyber Solutions and Francis Cianfroca and Curtis Blount from Insight Cyber. So let's give that conversation a listen.
Hello, and welcome to the Cyber Hero Adventures Defenders of the Digital Universe show. Today's show focuses on answering the question, how secure are the billions of devices that are connected to the internet, often referred to as the Internet of Things? Stay tuned to find out more. I'm your host, Gary Berman. Our mission is to shine the light on the people and organizations who keep us safe online while at work, home, and school, and to serve as a business-to-business networking platform for the cybersecurity and IT communities. We've learned that 55% of human communications is nonverbal. That's why we include a video feed, so that you have the option of seeing our guests or simply to just listen. You never know who you're going to connect with and how you'll be able to maximize opportunities resulting from hearing from our guests. As the victim of a series of cyber attacks, I've learned that the only time that you hear about hacking or cybersecurity is when the criminals win. Well, not anymore. Let's begin by saying thank you to today's panel of unsung cyber heroes who represent the countless people who toil in anonymity to keep us safe at home, work, and school. Jeff Schaefer is the VP of Client Engagement and Business Development at Aon Cyber Solutions. Jeff will share stories of real-life insider threats during his time with both Aon and 25 years with the U.S. Secret Service and much more. Hey, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Great, it's so great to have you. Thank you so much. Francis Cianfroca founded Bayshore Networks and Insight Cyber, two visionary companies in the industrial IoT cybersecurity space. He is the inventor of both platforms. He is recognized as an IoT industry visionary and evangelist, trusted by Fortune 100 CIOs and CSOs. He guides Insight Cyber's technology vision, provides critical strategic direction, directs customer relationships, and inspires the executive and technical management teams. You certainly have inspired me, Francis. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Gary. Thank you. And we're looking forward to a heroic conversation.
And by the way, I'll do the comedy. You focus on cybersecurity. that way we stay in our lanes. Does that work?
Yeah, it works.
Our next guest is Curtis Blount, the CISO of Insight Cyber. He has more than 30 years of experience in information security, IT and OT, risk management, regulatory compliance, and cloud cybersecurity. As the CISO, he has built global cybersecurity engineering architectures with AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. Curtis' forte, and a key area of his focus at Insight Cyber, is cyber and corporate risk management. Hey, Curtis. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So are we. You know, Curtis, we're going to learn a lot about what you do, on today's show. But I would like to ask, why do you do it? What is your mission? And tell us your origin story.
Most of us in the security space have a passion for it. We live it, we eat it, we breathe it every single day. Not only on the business side of the house, but also in our personal lives as well. So for me, like I said, I've been in it for 30 some odd years now. And I actually started out in the US military back in the early 80s during the ARPANET days. So that was my first kind of instance into the security realm. And then from there, it just blossomed. So I've been blessed to have a wonderful career spanning, a couple of decades of information security and now transitioning into cybersecurity now. But like I said, for most of us, it's a passion. You talk to us, you'll hear the passion that we talk about when, we talk about hacks and cybersecurity and threats and risk management. What do you need to do to help protect yourself? For us, it's a culture, and we love it. We eat it. We breathe it every single day.
One of the most amazing things that I've experienced in my kind of Forrest Gump journey into cybersecurity over the last several years is this service as a motivation. You use the word passion. What I have experienced is that you all are the defenders of the digital universe. I mean, you're the good people. And one of the other things that I've noticed is you all are humble. And so you've done some pretty cool stuff. Tell us a little bit about, some of the things that you've done in the trenches.
Yeah, in the trenches. So, well, I can't talk about the military stuff, so we won't go there.
Wait. I'm okay with it if you are. I'd like to get my first scoop from the DoD or something if you don't mind.
No, well, I will tell you that I was actually one of the very first engineers that was assigned to do DoD launches for the space shuttle program.
Wow.
So we did a lot of the DoD launches between 1984 through 91, I would say. Mostly all classified launches. So part of that classified launch is actually now what we know as GPS, or the Global Positioning Satellite Systems. Back then, it was more of a classified launch. So, but now it's more transition to the commercial space. But that's one aspect of it. I built out e-commerce platforms for Merrill Lynch, HSBC, Morgan Stanley, on the financial side of the house. One of the cool things that we actually worked on, this is back in right after 1999, we actually worked on a program that actually merged all the old Cirrus networks and Plus networks, which still exist today for ATMs and credit card transactions. Those networks never went away. We just created a platform that interfaced all three of those networks together. So now if you go to any ATM machine, you can just plug in whether it's your Amex card, MasterCard, American Express, Visa, and be able to make a transaction very easily. So, technology has really expanded over the last, 10 to 12 years. And now we're starting to see this major influx of IoT. There are several different IoT points that we should probably take a look at and consider. You have industrial IoT, which is all of the, RFID tags and, hard handheld scanners and things like that. And then you have the commercial IoT side of the house, where you have your smart homes and your mobile devices and all those things. So think about it as time goes on from the aspect of when I started, we were still on these massive mainframe systems down to these little small handheld devices in less than 30 years time frame. It's an amazing achievement that we've accomplished here.
Indeed, and it has the associated risk, which I can't think of a better person to share with us than Francis. And so Francis, tell us your origin story and your mission. Why do you do what you do?
So my mission, what I would like to do is basically to make the world safe for digital transformation that comes from the IoT and from artificial intelligence. And I think of, Curtis was just telling you all these great stories, about going through these last several decades and watching technology grow up and get more extensive and more self-contained and smaller and more ubiquitous, and that just opens up a massive attack surface. What I want to do by my mission is I want to make it so that all of cyberspace, cyber physical space, right, which is, we think of it as computer places. No, it's just where every information infrastructure and every business infrastructure is just now cyber, okay? And it needs to become self-healing and self-protecting. Okay, that's my mission. I want to see enough capability migrate, disseminate ubiquitously within our cyber physical spaces to the point that they will be resilient and assured proper operation and personal safety as well as data privacy. And I think that's going to require several generations of technology past what we have now. My origin story, really quick, I'm a software guy and an entrepreneur. I've started a number of companies, including Insight Cyber Group with Curtis. And I've got a long-standing background since high school of working on what we now call cyber physical systems. I used to hand make the instrumentation cables for early DCS systems, what are called, in oil refineries and pharmacology studies. And this was before we had TCP/IP networks. All right. Wow. Industrial control systems in the mid-90s started migrating from serial bus RS-485 buses to Ethernets, for a lot of interesting reasons, but all of a sudden now they're computer networks, right? And so that's how the cyber physical revolution was born. Now we're talking about IoT, which had its genesis perhaps as a buzzword, maybe 8 or 10 years ago at the most, but the pathway to that has been going for a good long time, and that's where my background is.
Jeff, Francis just used a very interesting phrase, self-healing. Can you share with us a little bit about your thoughts regarding healthcare and IoT devices and the safety of digital medical devices? Are they hackable?
I just noticed, look at everybody laughing. Are they hackable?
Wait. I wasn't trying to be funny.
So I would, that's a good question. So pretty much everything is probably hackable. If you want to put the time and effort and financial backing behind it, the answer is yes. As we've seen pretty much with most IoT devices that have come out, fairly quickly the bad guys are looking and have come up with ways around those. I mean, you can look at thermostats and medical devices and insulin pumps and other things, and that's just a couple off the top of my head that have been compromised and done so pretty quickly. I always go back to the story of when the iPhone, and they put the fingerprint to open up the iPhone. I think it was 72 hours before a group in Germany found a way around that. Mm-hmm. So as the new technology comes out, we're always very, very quick to implement it. Particularly in our homes, because of the convenience and the charm factor. And you get these alerts on your phone, and we're implementing these things, I think, ahead of security and ahead of proper implementation. The self-healing is a great concept, and part of that is visibility. And I talk to clients all the time about having visibility into these devices, and it's all your devices. And you used to say, I think it still holds true, Christmas time comes around, everyone gets all these new toys and they want them on the network, and then your IT department's then tasked with, hey, secure these things. We're going to use them, so you better secure them, not secure them so we can use them. That's kind of chicken before the egg thing. My origin story is I love technology and new and emerging technology. After 25 years of Secret Service, 17 of those were in the area of cyber. It was, okay, I love the new technology, but so do the bad guys, and how are they trying to compromise these things? So they're always looking at ways around them, or ways to use them for nefarious things. So we were looking at stopping that and helping put them away once we could find them and arrest them. So that's my origin story. And I like technology anyway, and then it's a matter of think like the bad guys and how are they going to try to use this and use it in a bad way.
Indeed. And Francis, how many connected devices are there now? And what are some of the projections for the future? And just your best estimate.
It's all over the map, and I would have given you a different answer a few months ago. Certainly billions easily today. How many people are there? 7 billion or 8 billion now, right? So this is it's an awfully big number. Hundreds of millions is a very safe guess. Now, as to the future, you got to consider who you're talking to, because different people have an interest in seeing these outcomes. I've seen numbers like 30 billion.
Wow.
Connected devices over the next 10 to 20 years. Well, okay, well, what's a connected device? They can be extremely small. All right, once network access and network acquisition capability grows up to the point that you can have like a $4 thermocouple, all right, have an IP address and easily acquire a network, then it's essentially unlimited, all right, and it's a tremendous space. So just think, whatever the biggest number that you can possibly imagine will be plausible, it'll be a bigger number than that.
Wow. That's really unbelievably interesting. And it just seems like...
I was going to say, I would just add to that, and not to cut you off, Gary, sorry about that. I mean, if you look at, there's not an industry out there that doesn't either have or is looking at implementing IoT. I mean, Curtis mentioned industrial, fleet maintenance. Gary, you mentioned healthcare, education, the home, monitoring devices. There's really not an industry out there that isn't looking at IoT or hasn't already implemented it. So that number, like I said, it's only going to go up.
And so Curtis, just to build on Jeff and Francis' point, so the attack surface is going to be, exponentially increasing on a scale of 1 to 100, 1 being the lowest and 100 being the highest. How secure is the average IoT device, and why do you think that?
The average IoT device, I would probably say -10.
-10.
Well,
one of the you just did a breakthrough for our show, because over my left-hand corner you're going to see what I'm actually thinking, and it's going to be this sort of animated thing like, what?
Well, let me explain that. And actually, Jeff kind of alluded to that a few minutes ago. Everything is hackable. You're going to have a breach no matter what. There is no true secure environment out there. It is the level of risk management and processes that you put in place to protect yourself to minimize those risks. So with the billions and billions and billions of connected devices out there, there are so many different aspects that you have to consider. Let's talk about the IoT space and the millions of devices that are currently out there for industrial IoT. You can put minimized or minimal controls around those because you control those environments to a certain degree. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be completely safe. It's the aspect of knowing that you're going to have an incident or, a breach, and what do you do to minimize the effect of that breach? How much downtime are you going to have? How much incident response planning have you done to actually protect that? That's on one side of the house. On the commercial side of the house, good luck.
Wait, Curtis, good luck was not on the scale. So
I know it's not on this scale.
Actually, you've done that twice now. There was no -10, and there's not good luck, although I wish it to everyone. From 1 to 100.
I give it probably 2. And
wow.
And the reason why I say this is because, and this is something that Francis and I have been discussing, over the last, couple of months, it's about the cognitive ability to understand and assess risk. And what that basically means is that from a mental perspective, think of the consumer space and how they perceive security, not only in their own homes, but also in their private lives as well. You have to take that cognitive aspect into consideration to say, okay, do they have I hate to say it, but the intelligence to actually put forth the measurable amount of security controls in place to protect their homes from, let's say, for their smart devices or the mobile phones or things like that. And unfortunately, we live in a society, especially here in the US, where we don't necessarily take security as serious as we do. Internationally, that's a different story altogether, especially in Europe because of the privacy laws, specifically around GDPR. But here in the US, it's kind of, whatever, and we kind of just keep things moving. And it's a shame. It really is. But to go back to that point I mentioned earlier, you're going to get hacked. There's going to be an incident. It's how you respond to that incident is determines whether or not you're going to have a success or you're going to have a complete failure. If you look at, let's say, the breaches that we had in the past, Target, Home Depot, and a few others out there, it's how they responded to the breach, which impacted the market value of the company overall versus, well, they had a breach. Well, yeah, everybody's going to have a breach no matter what. But again, how did you respond to it? What was your response to it? And how did you take care of that breach? That is the most key and most critical factor.
Oh, that's a great insight. Just to build on what Curtis is saying, Francis, given, of course, COVID-19 and everybody working and going to school, from home, how do you assess the cybersecurity posture of the United States, and what can people do to protect themselves?
Okay, so that's just an enormous question, and when we think about it every day,
well, it's a 30-minute show. I mean, so
right.
you just
we certainly want to get Jeff's perspective on the medical aspects of this, since you mentioned COVID. One of the things to point out, by extending something Curtis said, think about those headline hacks, right? Like Target, Sony, Maersk, right? Some of the highest profile incidents that produce massive impacts in companies came through the OT side. Okay, you think about HVAC systems that are, and Curtis, you and I, we've walked a bunch of those.
Yeah, we have.
We put our, walked through with our hard hats on, and actually looked at those things, and it is the case that the OT systems, which are never designed for security, and that's another big topic, but they present vulnerabilities through which you can exploit them and then bounce off into the IT space, and then start doing things like stealing credit cards and executing classical exploits in that realm. So IoT and OT are, in essence, they're highly impactful in their own right, and that's another topic, but they also present another attack vector for getting into IT space. And I'll bet you Jeff has some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, Jeff, one of the things that you spend a great deal of time and effort on with your team is incident response. Can you share with our audience, what is the first thing you do when you get that, 3 a.m. call?
Boy, there's so many places I want to go here.
Coffee.
Yeah. Well, I mean, before you get that call, and both Francis and Curtis touched on it, I don't care what you do in life, if you're playing piano or playing football, if you're not practicing, you're not going to be very good at it.
Yeah.
So if you haven't taken the initiative to figure out, what do I have, what needs protected, and when it doesn't, when the protection breaks down and something doesn't work, are we going to be able to respond to it in a fast manner and get things back up and running, right? Business continuity, we need to get back up. So, other than the administrative things that I have to do, we talk about cyber insurance and outside counsel and things that you're going to need to have in the event of a compromise. Hopefully, if it's a client of ours already, we are already familiar with their network. We know what they have on-prem, we know what they have in the cloud, we know what their capabilities are. Again, this comes down to practicing it with either tabletop exercises or something like that. But the first thing I want to know is, what capabilities do you have, and what have you done so far to mitigate and stop this? And where do your capabilities end? When do you need the experts on Aon's team? When do you need the malware reverse engineer guys, the log analysis guys, the disk forensics guys that can go in there and figure out, okay, this is your patient zero, this is what happened, this is how they got in, let's close that, and let's make sure there's no persistence in there, because if you start standing everything up again and the persistence is there, it's just going to happen all over again. And we see that a lot, and that's one of the things we have, and that's why you practice. Is you can't just go to your backups and put everything back up again if it's going to get re-encrypted or it's going to happen again. So you have to make sure that those are clean, and you're never going to be able to do that, at least not well and efficiently, if you're not practicing it. So again, having the proper visibility in these IoT and other devices, and knowing what they have and what they can do and what they can't do, and having that visibility and then having a response plan and practicing it is just key.
Indeed. And Francis, so maybe you can share with our audience, do you do tabletop exercises, or you have cyber ranges, or how do you help protect people?
Well, cyber range is a pretty interesting and somewhat esoteric practice area. There's a handful of people that are doing it. I want to connect that to one thing that Jeff has now mentioned 2 or 3 times, which is visibility, right? If you're going to really be a cyber defender, all right, if you're going to provide for high assurance of operations, resilience and robustness in the face of inevitable compromise, you got to know what you have on the ground, and I think that's really the key to it. And here's why. I mean, there's an issue of basic economics here. I mentioned before, right? Yeah, what's the most basic kind of a physical sensor? Thermocouple, temperature sensor. Okay, it's a 50-cent part. Okay, I used to walk into meetings when I did presentations. I'd pull one out of my pocket. Right here it is, like dangling on this little yellow wire. It's a Type K thermocouple. Well, there's going to be tens of thousands of them in your average chemical plant, for example, and they are becoming connected devices because there's so much value to centralizing and analyzing and operationalizing the data that they throw off. You're not ever putting this genie back in the bottle, but what you're also never going to do is take a $2 or a $4 part and put a $30 compute stack on it with security software. Okay, that's not going to happen. So the point with all that is, your devices, the infrastructure on which everybody's running their business. Okay, and now think about this from another perspective. You don't control it all. Curtis made a point about that. Okay, in environments like a manufacturing facility, you can have some control. Well, what about when you walk into a building? We walk into a commercial building, and we've done this and found that the HVAC systems are on the same networks as your iPad acquires when you walk in.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, so now to Jeff's point, to give come to the answer here, visibility is incredibly important, but that is a scale problem. Okay, there's no way. I mean, CISOs, and I Curtis will tell you this 10 times. One of the big challenges that they face is so much security technology, so many firewalls, MSSPs, and IDS, IPS systems, and they're throwing off so much logging that we spawned a whole industry, the SIM industry, just to manage that and query all that stuff. Okay, well, that's crazy. All right, you're talking about expanding the surface out for IoT, it tentuples it. Okay, it's already an unsolvable problem to have visibility the way we typically do it. So that means there is absolutely a role for automation. And when you consider that you can't put security stacks onto IoT devices that are so cheap, okay, it swamps the economic value. You got to recognize that this is wide open surface, and we are thinking very hard about technologies that we can put in place at high scale that are going to give visibility that's passed through some artificial intelligence so that you get the insights with context and only the things that are really predictive of an attack. And Jeff is in the insurance business. Now, Curtis and I come out of the security business. Security people like to say, well, I got to be right 100% of the time. The bad guy only needs to be right once. Wrong way to think about it. Okay, that's the old-fashioned security model, which is 100%. Okay, I love the insurance industry's model where Jeff comes from, in his current life, right, where you basically cover yourself up to 98% and you underrate the remaining 2%. Okay, and I think with an AI-based high-scaling visibility approach, we can learn how to observe very subtle signals that are behavioral anomalies across all of these devices that are, 98% of the time, they're going to predict, okay, when somebody is doing recon in your network before they trigger an exploit, and you can stop them and remediate them. And we call that proactive, a proactive approach to security rather than today's reactive approach. And that's what's needed. And if you get to like 2%, if you can cover all, but if you can pre-detect and proactively remediate 98% of the problems that are going to show up, I'll go to Aon, to Jeff's company, and buy an insurance policy to cover me for the remaining 2%, and I'll call it a day.
Well, that's incredibly interesting. And just to clarify for our audience, Jeff, do you want to amplify a little bit about what you do at Stroz Friedberg? Because Jeff is not directly in the insurance part, so I just want to give Jeff a chance to clarify, his role. But we take your point, Francis. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And I can tell you, since Aon's acquisition of Stroz Friedberg, I've learned a lot about insurance. So, yeah, I'm not on the insurance side of the house. Certainly know a lot of the guys. I work with a lot of the guys over there that broker the insurance, and then of course we work with the carriers when an incident does occur. But yeah, being able to do exactly that and get the insurance for that part that you can't necessarily get coverage for the stuff that you can't take care of yourself is what it's all about. And then using them if and when a compromise occurs. So yeah, where I am now, big into the insurance, and it's growing, and it's gotten to the point now where when cyber insurance first started coming out, only the big dogs could have it because it was so expensive. It's not the case anymore. There are very small and medium-sized companies that there are policies for them as well. And again, like I said, both on the proactive side, having come from Secret Service, and now with Aon Cyber Solutions, let's prevent it from happening first. That's the goal. So all that proactive stuff, the tabletops, the code review, the assessments, the pen testing, all that kind of stuff needs to be done. And I get that you can be assessed to death and you can be overcovered with insurance or whatever, but those things have to be done and then, like I said, and then testing your incident response when they fail. And like I've said, if it's a state-sponsored or organized crime and they want you, they're going to get you. Yeah. And you need to have a response plan in place, and it needs to be tested.
Indeed. As everyone can tell, we could go on for hours and hours, and as we're kind of wrapping up, Curtis, is there anything else that you'd like to add to amplify your mission?
Sure. Just wanted to bring out one particular point that both Francis and Jeff actually mentioned, and that's really around the cyber insurance aspect of this and protecting that 2%. As a CISO, one of our main jobs also is to educate, and we're educating the governing bodies, mainly the C-suites and the executive boards, on security and cybersecurity. And I can't tell you how many times where I've gone into a board meeting where I've actually sat in front of a CIO and tried to explain to him cybersecurity, and he says to me, well, we have breach insurance, so don't worry about it. And my response to him is that while you might have breach insurance to cover you, breach insurance doesn't cover everything. From a regulatory standpoint and also from a legal standpoint, if you have not do your due diligence to protect your environment and adhere to your own security policies, if you have a breach based on those security policies, then breach insurance is not going to cover you.
Right.
So, and now you're talking about major revenue impact. So from that particular perspective, we have to explain, and we also have to teach people about the different aspects of cybersecurity. We've talked about, IoT, and we've alluded to the aspect of, the different environments out there. But ultimately, from Francis's point, from Jeff's standpoint, and from my standpoint, we're educators as well as security guys. We're consistently explaining and trying to get people to understand security is everybody's responsibility.
Well, just on that point, we are very fortunate. We've just recently signed a joint venture with an Israeli cybersecurity firm to bring our animated characters to life in virtual 3D and 2D on laptops and phones, really just with a curriculum of basic cyber hygiene. Because one of the things I've listened and learned from, and Curtis, to see if you think this is valid, is that it's the 80-20 rule. Like 80% of the capital allocation in this ecosystem is for technology related solutions, but 80% of the attacks are from simple human error. Is that a valid premise?
Yes, an absolute valid parameter. I think I mentioned earlier the cognitive aspect of this,
right?
Because the one thing that we're missing, even on the enterprise risk management side of the house, is where I sit right now, is looking at the human mind and the human element of risk. How we perceive risk on the commercial side of the house, because we're so in-depth in the Facebooks of the world and the Instagrams of the world, we don't necessarily take a look at our own security as a high value target. So it's low probability, high value. And because of that aspect, that's where the hackers actually go after. They go after that human element. Social engineering is another aspect to that. So we really, really have to educate people and continue to do so, to explain to them, not only is it your responsibility, but you have to take your own security seriously.
Indeed. And on a lighter note, one of the things that I kind of adopted as my North Star when recovering from this series of attacks and the consequences was a quote by Albert Einstein. And he famously, a reporter asked him, he said, "Mr. Einstein, on one hand, you have science and physics and mathematics and that. And on the other hand, there are many people who believe in like the possible existence of a higher authority or God." And Einstein, famously replied, "Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous." So Curtis, can you share, and I'm going to ask all three of you to end here. Curtis, can you share an Einstein moment, with our audience in your life?
Oh boy, I have too many of them. Like I said, for me, I'm kind of the in the trench kind of guy, so I'm an operations guy at heart. And having said that, there have been many times where I think probably the biggest one for me is 1998. I sat in a meeting with Merrill Lynch and American Express, and we talked about business continuity. And right up the street, and this is in New York City, of course, and right up the street is our major data center, literally a mile up the street on West Side Avenue, on West Side Highway, excuse me. And I explained to them, we need to move our data center. Oh, no, it's fine. We can leave it right there. And I said, karma is going to bite us in the butt if we don't move this. A few years later, we had 9/11, which ironically, I was in the South Tower when the planes hit, because I actually worked on the 35th floor. And as most people might not know, when the North Tower fell, it fell on the World Financial Center on the American Express side, and it scraped the building. The 6th floor was the data center for American Express.
Wow.
If we had just taken the aspect of looking and say, okay, worst case scenario, we probably would have been able to save that data center and save millions and millions and millions of dollars at the same exact time.
Wow.
Across the street from that was the AT&T switching facility for the New York Stock Exchange, as well as all the other financial services companies in the New York area. that was World Trade 7. We lost that as well. So for me, it was that kind of hindsight moment, that I guess, that Einstein moment where, now when I look at security and I look at risk, for me, it's always worst case scenario, then we build upon that versus, I'm not going to worry about it. It probably won't happen. If we say this probably won't happen, more than likely it will happen.
Wow, thanks for sharing that incredible story. And you are the example of the unsung heroes that we want to shine the light on, to say thank you. Francis, I'm not sure how you're going to top that. Do you have an Einstein moment?
I'm gonna ask Curtis, because I know the answer to this. What happened to the Merrill Lynch data center? Where is it now?
It is now, part of it's actually in AWS, and the other aspect now is in Somerset, New Jersey.
There you go.
So
I remember, Curtis. So this is not just an Einstein moment. This is a big power moment for you, because you actually, you were right, and all the Wall Street firms, except for Goldman, which was moved from east side to west side, everybody else moved their headquarters out of Manhattan. And
yes, they did.
So that was. But I'll tell you, Gary, my story is, I think about, I'm going to restate it because it's such a good point. You got to plan for the worst case, because you'll get it, okay? And if it's a matter of, business continuity, revenue protection, those are all important things to CEOs. When you look at critical infrastructure and national security, now you're talking about people's lives.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that takes the whole computation up to another level. And I often get asked, hey, Francis, we hear stories about the power grid, is it possible for people to take down the grid? Okay, so what I wanted to say to that was, we think about this all the time. You think about cybersecurity as it relates to IT. Well, the attack surface there is basically, maybe a dozen or so mainstream versions of Microsoft Windows, all right? And you've got we got thousands of hackers all around the world gunning for the same platform, looking for the same vulnerabilities. And what's their objective? Either to make trouble or to make money, okay? But when you look at critical infrastructure, okay, very different profile. We like to talk about risk. Risk mathematically is a combination. It's you multiply the vulnerability times the impact, okay? So on the IT side, when everybody's shooting for Windows vulnerabilities, okay, well, the vulnerability is exceptionally high, okay? It's a uniform attack surface all across the world, and you got thousands of people shooting at it. So vulnerability is extremely high. Impact is, think about, you're going to be offline, your emails are going to go be late, you'll lose a database, you'll have to back it up, okay? Those are all bad impacts. Now think about it in critical infrastructure with IoT. The vulnerability is very, very low and very fragmented, because you're talking about a lot of different kinds of systems, and it takes some major domain knowledge and expertise to figure out how to knock over a synchrophaser network, or take a generator offline, or disrupt the power system. That's a different category of knowledge. So the vulnerability is very low. The impact, which is the other factor to risk, is off the charts high.
Well, to that end, we're going to have have you back on another show, and coincidentally, we're recording an industrial control systems show next, and we'd love to have you back. So, Jeff, you're going to have the last word.
Yeah. So I would take my last comment down to a smaller scale. And what I mean by that is, and a couple of best practices, we've seen hackers, ransomware.
Yeah, but wait, hold on, time out. My question is, look, this is the first redirection I've ever done. I'm not supposed to say that out loud, evidently, or I'm supposed to be thinking it, but Jeff, Einstein moment.
Correct, yeah. So I think it for me, it is, even your smallest companies are vulnerable. And not just vulnerable, but targeted. And that's where I was going with this. We've seen a two-person company get hit with ransomware, and they ask us for $150. So while these large-scale attacks are out there, the Einstein moment kind of to me is you can't rely, even in your own house, on the company who gave you the device, who produced the device or the network it's on to provide security. That is up to you. And you will be targeted, even for a little bit of amount of money, or targeted to get into the larger environment from your house into the corporate network. And with kids at school and working from home and stuff like that, you're just a bigger target. So it's not so much an Einstein moment as it's just that light bulb going off that the attack surface is right there in your house now. And if you're not taking security seriously yourself, you're going to get hit. And even if it's not hitting you, it's using you as a pivot point or as a launch point into the larger network. And that's a big concern that I have.
Wow, that's an incredibly important insight, because most of the conversations that we've had so far on the show have been pertaining to, B2B with some, impact, potential impact on consumers. But now that everybody is all in one physical location, it's all just one story. So on that note, for more information, we'll include our guest contact information in the show notes. And thanks so much to Jeff, Curtis, and Francis for this incredible show. If you would like to be a guest on our show, just send an email to Gary@cyberheroescomics.com. Thanks so much.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here with the Thursday edition of the news headlines. First up on DevOps.com, we have an article that looks at the drawbacks in using open source technology. I know we've had plenty of articles on the site that discusses the benefits of open source, but we all know that nothing is perfect. So open source has numerous issues, including a lack of built-in resources for security and compliance, not to mention the complexities that could lead to employee frustration and burnout. Yes, open source does open the door for innovation, but it also can mean a whole lot of time putting out fires brought on by using open source. But incorporating a data ops approach with open source adoption can help. Data ops encourages an environment where people can collaborate, reduce process complexity, and fully optimize the use of their data. In other words, it democratizes the data so anyone in the company can access it and operate it directly without needing the engineering team's help. That frees up technical staff and developers from tasks such as tooling and enables them to utilize open source for R&D and other innovative priorities. And we take a look at an issue that is close to almost every organization's hearts and wallets: how to avoid overspending on cloud services. If you use the cloud, then you're most likely paying way too much because you're over provisioning. That cloud waste is expected to cost in the neighborhood of $21 billion with a B by next year, according to Gartner. There are many reasons for this tendency of organizations to overspend, from simple lack of knowledge about their cloud service to a lack of governance around cloud usage and spend. Even the types of tools an organization uses can lead to cloud overspend. There is no action without first awareness, and this article hopefully will make folks aware of the hows and wheres of their cloud waste and offers tips to stem the flow of cash. In news, the Continuous Delivery Foundation has added the open source Ortelius platform for managing the deployment of microservices as an incubation level project. Ortelius was created by DeployHub, which donated it to the CD Foundation, which itself is working on creating de facto CD standards. It has the support of oodles of companies, including Google, CloudBees, CircleCI, JFrog, IBM, GitLab, Netflix, and DeployHub. Ortelius already integrates with Helm, Ansible, and Spinnaker CD orchestration tools and deployment tools. The next step for the technology is to address the entire application development lifecycle of cloud-native applications using a GitOps methodology. Over on Container Journal, we have an interesting look at the growing need for a digital librarian in cloud-native development. Cloud-native means a shift to reusable service-based architectures, which simplifies development, but the downstream impact to supporting teams is not yet fully understood. Consider that the average modern-day web application contains more than 460 software component releases, of which 85% are open source. That's a whole lot of application components that have to be managed and secured. That's why organizations need digital librarians to catalog and track components, to protect against theft, to replace when the components are worn out, and to check the components out to various users. Think of the librarian at your public library, or better yet, your old high school, and you'll get the picture. Of course, AI ops can help in this endeavor, bringing order to chaos and simplifying the process of cataloging and managing the growing number of software components in an organization. Over on Security Boulevard, our legal guru Mark Rash is back with an article about what constitutes legal use of data from a legal point of view. It looks at the very recent incident involving one Florida Department of Health employee who allegedly used the department's ReadyOps emergency messaging app in November to warn other employees about the novel coronavirus, advising them that it was time to speak up in light of more than 17,000 dead in Florida and that they should speak out before it's too late. Well, if you know Florida, you know that didn't go over too well. The message was delivered to about 1,700 users before authorities put a stop to it. But what transpired next was a raid on her house by the FBI, guns drawn, to collect her computer and her phone because she allegedly was in violation of Florida's computer crime statute. Now, this comes on the heels of a Supreme Court case involving a Georgia state trooper who was caught using the NCIC database for personal use, exchanging the collected information for money. The case looked at whether the state trooper accessed the database in excess of his authorization. The courts have been struggling with determining which uses of a computer are authorized and which uses exceed authorization, and what standard to apply. It's a long road dotted with many potholes and many things to consider, and I expect we'll be hearing more about this. Data continues to be our biggest ally and our most damaging enemy. And finally, we have an article that looks at vulnerabilities in cloud file systems and how they can be a major issue during the second wave of the pandemic, and folks are once again working from home. We all know that many companies cobbled together systems in their rush to provide their employees access to data while being sequestered, and that includes organizations shifting to multi-cloud environments. That's great, but some are using storage technologies as global file systems that were not purpose-built for the cloud. And that introduces a level of insecurity that hackers are now better prepared to attack. now that they too have had a few months to understand the infrastructure setups of organizations. What's needed is a combination of public cloud provider data availability and durability, along with enterprise-grade data protection technologies to build secure cloud-based collaboration and file transfer. All right, that's all that I have for this edition of the news headlines. Please check back on Monday when I will have a fresh batch for you. Until then, please have a great day and stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with Casey Ellis, who is a CTO, founder, and chairman of a company called BugCrowd. Casey, so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So tell me a little bit about BugCrowd. I know you guys are kind of into that whole ethical hacking thing. So tell me about your company, what you guys do, what market you serve, all that good stuff.
Yeah, certainly. So BugCrowd started in Sydney, Australia, which you can probably hear. It's where I'm from. Back in 2012, really what the idea of the company was to basically harness the creativity of the white hat hacker community from all around the world and connect them in with all of the different questions that people need to answer when it comes to cybersecurity. So back at that point in time, what was becoming obvious was that there weren't enough people that thought bad but did good to go around and help defenders understand how to secure their stuff. And at the same time, I come from the hacker community. I was a pen tester in a past life and all that kind of stuff. Just knowing that there was such an incredible body of people that have, skills to bring to the table and a real desire to do that, they just hadn't really gotten the invite yet. So BugCrowd was really born out of this idea of how can we plug this latent potential in that community with the unmet demand of the market to do things like find vulnerabilities in code, find things that might be wrong configuration-wise in networks. We do work on cars, we do work on all sorts of things. So I'll pause there.
All right. Good stuff. So you guys obviously are working in a number of environments, and I imagine retail is a major area of focus for your organization. And kind of interested in finding out from you kind of what you've seen in the retail space, especially as COVID-19 has hit and pushed. Everybody's working from home. Everybody's doing everything from home these days, and that obviously includes a fair amount of retail, online shopping, purchasing, and with the holiday season, obviously that's going to be increasing. So, what have you seen in the retail space as it pertains to, the number of vulnerabilities or, maybe even different types of vulnerabilities that have emerged during the pandemic that your organization has seen among, those online retail offerings these days?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of things have happened, and you're right. Everything kind of changed almost on a dime. We all changed how we operate, how we consume, even how we build. And I think another thing that we saw happen, especially in retail, a couple of other verticals as well, but retail was one of them, was this acceleration of digital transformation. So this idea of companies that have this idea that they want to roll out over the next 3 years to take a part of their physical experience and put it online, or improve their online experience for their shoppers. That all of a sudden became a 6 month plan instead of a 3 year plan, because everyone's working from home and the consumption patterns had changed so dramatically and all at the same time. So it became almost this race to compete to improve that experience for the user as quickly as possible. So off the back of that, from a vulnerability standpoint, speed is the natural enemy of security. When you do things quickly, it's a lot harder to do them well, unless you're being mindful of the potential for error and the potential for vulnerability to be introduced. So seeing things like poor configurations in cloud deployments, data left open, keys left open, even with development teams more distributed than normal, the ways that developers are sharing information with each other to build all this stuff. kind of, in some cases came together in a bit of an ad hoc way. And really, where Bugcrowd comes into that is basically engaging the community that we work with to go and look for those issues and actually surface them. The ethical hackers that we work with, we incentivize them, and if they find an issue that's relevant to the customer, they get paid for that. They get paid in proportion to how severe the issue that they find is. And the whole idea is to basically clean this stuff up before the bad guys come along and do something with it for real. Because I think the thing is, to err is human. Like I think software vulnerability, configuration issues, all of the things that can make a computer exploitable, they're all a product of human creativity. And humans are incredible. Like we come up with all of this amazing stuff, but we're also not perfect. So, I think the idea of basically stepping one step ahead of that and assuming that there will be mistakes and then putting catch-alls in place to be able to fix them when they arise and try to repeat them less frequently in the future. That's really what we do on the back of that.
Makes sense. Makes total sense. So you mentioned the rush to digital transformation. You said 6 months. I've actually seen some digital transformations that are happening in 6 weeks. And obviously that has been...
I was being generous there.
Yeah. Don't be too generous. But, obviously with that, to your point, there are a lot of mistakes that are made in the process. And I kind of feel like our digital transformation now is kind of happening in 2 phases, or at least 2 phases. One is the get or done phase, if you will. It's, let's just get all the processes in place. And then phase 2 is let's go back and fix all the mistakes we made. And that includes any of those vulnerabilities. But it seems like you've kind of let the barn door open, when you're going at it from that perspective, because you've actually already introduced all these vulnerabilities and it's much more difficult to remediate after the fact. Tell me I'm wrong. Am I wrong? I don't know.
No, you're not wrong at all.
Okay.
And I think where that comes into play, I mean, the more you can integrate security into your design and architecture phases, the more you can do pre-production testing, pre-production like adversarial feedback on what you're building. The better position you're going to be by the time you hit production, and those are also things that Bugcrowd supports. So we've got a product that we call next generation pen testing, which is effectively the same as the public kind of open bug bounties that people hear about, but it's done in a way that's private, it's compartmentalized, it's capped cost, and it's actually designed to be done before things hit production or in a more targeted way, for that exact reason. So, I'm obviously a big believer in testing. But then what you're wanting to do with the feedback that you get from that testing is to actually identify where potential any patterns exist within your engineering teams and within your company even. People talk about like 0-day vulnerabilities in systems and things like that. Something that fascinates me even more is when you identify systemic patterns of behavior in an engineering team that are causing the same issue over and over again. Like you don't want to just go out and point out that issue every time it makes it out into production. You want to actually try to learn what the root cause is and educate back into that. And for that sort of thing, like Bugcrowd partners with companies like Secure Code Warrior, for example, for developer education and security training, things like that. But yeah, I mean, your overall point of like, once it's in production, it's more expensive to fix. That's absolutely true. It's also true that the longer it sits in production, the more expensive it continues to get to fix, because you end up with code being built up, around and underneath the issue, and the whole idea of regression testing and all those sorts of things becomes more of an expensive proposition. So basically, yeah, it's architecting it well, trying to understand what the root causes are when failure does occur, and then having as much firepower as is economically rational for your organization to be able to identify these things as quickly as possible once they slip through.
So let me ask you about the term ethical hacking or white hat hacking.
Sure.
Hacking to me is, traditionally been kind of a bad word, if you will. It has a negative connectivity. Do you think that, adding the word ethical or white hat in front of it, do you think it's, it dilutes it to the point where people are okay with the idea of having somebody who can, very easily go in and break your system, actually go in and have that level of access. I'm just wondering, how the market is kind of feeling about ethical hacking in China.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's a fantastic question. Hacking as a term was never meant to carry intent of malice. It was it goes back. You can sort of, actually, we've written a bunch of posts about this at various points in time because, this kind of confusion between a hacker and the word that I prefer to use for a bad actor is like an attacker or a malicious hacker. So hacker becomes the default, normal, good, almost like morally agnostic skill set. A malicious hacker is someone who's doing it in order to harm or to steal. So that's my little soapbox on that. And I think it's a lot like the difference between a locksmith and a burglar. That's a really obvious concept to the average layperson because we've been living with that idea for a couple of 100 years now, and it's just makes sense. I think this particular field of security studies and computer science and all that other stuff, it's not only like relatively new, it's also kind of like weird and cloaked in mystery and dark hoodies and I think there's elements that I love about that as part of the hacker community. There is a mystique to it that's kind of fun, but it does mean that it's also a little bit difficult for average people to understand. And if they don't understand that, then it's easier for them to be fearful. So I think, really where we're up to now, back when we started the company, most of the task was convincing people that, it's not all burglars, there's locksmiths too. And it's really this idea of, my background getting into security is I really enjoy thinking like a criminal. I just have absolutely no desire to be one. That idea of the creativity and the quirks and like thinking around corners, solving puzzles and different things like that. That sort of curiosity isn't in and of itself a crime. It becomes a question of like, how do you use that? And where do you set your moral bar as an individual? So I think, we're at a point now where it's becoming obvious that those skills are just as relevant for staying safe as they are to, be mindful of when they're in the hands of someone malicious. And I think there's still a ton of work to be done there. It's why we do things like, Disclose.io and trying to make sure that there's safe harbor and there's the right kind of things happening around laws to protect people that are working in good faith. But yeah, there's good progress.
Yeah, it seems to me that the level of complexity that applications bring today, and the necessity in ensuring that those applications are secure, mandates that you have people like white hat or ethical hackers doing what they're doing to make sure that that the applications are secure. And then, I hate to say it, but so many applications still make the field or make it out of production, fairly insecure. So I'm not sure that there's ever going to be an application that is 100% secure. But I do see a lot more adoption, or at least kind of a greater comfort level with ethical hacking in the space, especially as more organizations are adopting DevSecOps and they're doing 100%. Pen testing and other things like that. So obviously.
Having it be accepted as a normal part of developing code. It's like, this is just a feedback loop that you're getting from people that think in a different way to how you think as a builder. We saw it, even with the elections that have just passed in the US, the idea of establishing neighborhood watch for the internet around voting machines and around some of the states. We call that a vulnerability disclosure program where, an organization or an entity basically goes out to the open internet and says, hey, if you see something, say something. So it's not a bug bounty. It's not a pen test. It's literally just saying, okay, we actually want to hear security feedback. And, two things happen. One is you start to get that feedback so you can fix the issues. But the other thing that I think is even more powerful, and this applies to retail as well, is it demonstrates transparency. and it demonstrates, I think, this very kind of confident, transparent approach to the overall system, and the fact that like the user is the most important thing here. If we can get information that's going to help us make the user more secure, in the case of election systems, making sure the vote's more secure. In the case of retail, the transaction and whatever else is around that transaction is more secure. That nets out to consumer confidence at the end of the day, which is something that retailers are obviously thinking about a lot.
Right. So do you think that retailers, the retail space in general is generally more secure this year than maybe in years past, or because of the amount of stuff, action that's happened with the pandemic, that maybe, there may be a little dip in the security of applications from the retail space this year?
That's a really interesting question. I think, every year there's a bunch of activity that happens around, Black Friday, Cyber Monday. There's, common, correlated points of compromise that start to filter out towards Christmas. And then we hear about a bunch of stuff that happened in January, February of the following year. I don't think this year is going to be any exception to that, because, the bad guys have got to eat. And ultimately, however tall we build our fences, they're going to find either a way over those fences or find places where the fences are a bit lower, where they can still get their work done. So, I think the threat hasn't changed. If anything, that's become more active because the adversary is aware of the changes in online buying patterns, just in the same way that we are as consumers. On the plus side, I do think that, there's been, 2020 has been a pretty interesting year from my perspective, just in terms of people's baseline awareness of risk, just in general. There's, and globally, not just in the US, working with the pandemic, working with some of the societal changes the pandemic's kind of triggered, all sorts of other things that have happened. At the same time, I think people are thinking more about, how risk plays into their decision making, which I've seen, in my seat at Bugcrowd, net out to people being more proactive in how they test and confirm the safety of their systems. So assuming that's true right across the board, and assuming that people have taken advantage of stuff like DevSecOps in order to have security be part of a process, not just be a thing that you tack on at the end. Wherever that's happened, I think we're actually going to end up better off. But, as I said before, a lot of stuff's been done in a hurry. So I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, well, we're having this conversation on Cyber Monday, so I guess we'll probably start to hear about 4 weeks from now whether we've got some major issues on our hands.
That tends to be the pattern.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Casey, for joining me today and having the conversation with me. Just interesting times we live in, and maybe not. Maybe I would like to have next year be a little less interesting, if you know what I mean. But
hopefully we get a little pause next year. But I do think we've 2020, in amongst all of the, not to make light or even ignore the tragedy and the suffering that a lot of people have gone through. I do think some of the changes that it's forced us over collectively in terms of how we consume and use technology, how we interact with each other, how we buy online, how we do all of those things. I actually think it's, there's a lot of good that can come out of it once we're done dealing with the pandemic.
Well, hopefully that's our silver lining to this year.
Indeed.
So, all right, Casey, thanks again. I really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Likewise.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with the Thursday edition of the Webinars Preview. As always, we have a great lineup of webinars on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. Just wanted to let you know about 3 that are coming up, so you can mark your calendar and hopefully join 1 or 2 of them, or 3 of them. The first one is happening Monday, December 14th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It's called The Evolving Role of the Developer in 2021. It's sponsored by Sonatype. Now, this webinar focuses on some of the key traits of high-performing teams and how that impacts the role of the developer. So we're going to be talking about things like the ways to choose the best third-party dependencies, ways to determine the lowest effort upgrades between open source versions, how to solve for issues in both direct and transitive dependencies with one single click, and how to block and quarantine suspicious open source components. There's a whole lot of open source in this webinar, so please check this one out. Next one is also happening Monday, December 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It is a panel discussion. It's called Issues and Answers in Cloud Security. It's actually one that I'll be moderating. I'm really excited about this one coming up. This is a Media Ops sponsored event, and it features Him's Power of Delphix and Teddy Pulls of Signal Sciences, which is now Fastly. We're going to be ripping on an ebook that has just been published on the same topic. We're going to take a kind of a loose look at the ebook and cover some issues around cloud security. Teddy she actually is very well versed in layer 7 security. So I know that is going to be a large part of the conversation. We're also going to be talking about, obviously, how the pandemic has affected security in the age of the cloud and lots of other topics. So hopefully we can get everybody involved in that webinar. Again, that one is happening Monday, December 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. Finally, the third and final webinar I want to let you know about is called Wishes Do Come True, Fast Development Secure Delivery. That one is happening Tuesday, December 15th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by Sneak. This one looks at ways organizations can speed up the pace of development that is necessary to be ahead of their competitors, but without sacrificing the security and of the applications they're delivering. This one also focuses on the Sneak and Circle CI technology, and our speakers will talk about ways to build a container delivery CI/CD pipeline using Circle CI, how to use Sneak to fix risks introduced by open source containers and infrastructure as code environments, and interpreting Circle CI pipeline insights, including areas of constraint and future improvement. Good stuff for that one. I am looking forward to all three of these webinars, and I hope you will take some time and join me for them. Meanwhile, please check back on Monday for another fresh batch of webinars in the webinar preview. Until then, have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe. All right, next up, we have a conversation between Mitch and Sumedh Thakar, Qualys President and Chief Product Officer, and Badri Raghunathan, who is the Qualys Director of Product Management Container Security. They talk about Qualys's new container runtime security offering. So let's give it a shot.
This is Digital Anarchist.
I have the great pleasure of being joined by a couple of gentlemen I know from Qualys. First is Sumedh Thakar, who is President and Chief Product Officer, as well as Badri Raghunathan, who is Director of Product Management with Container Security emphasis. Gentlemen, great to be talking with you.
Mitch, always a pleasure.
It's a great pleasure to see you again. Badri as well. Well, great. Let's just have you, if you would both do a quick introduction of yourselves. Maybe, Sumedh, if you want to go first, tell us a little bit about Qualys. Hopefully most everybody knows about Qualys if you've been around for a while, but there may be some folks who would love to hear sort of a quick overview.
I hope everybody does know, but in case the minority, those who don't, I'm Sumedh. I'm President and Chief Product Officer for Qualys. I'm responsible for all the product strategy at Qualys. Qualys, as most of you know, we have been very strong for a long time in providing cloud-based security. focusing initially on vulnerability management, but now we have really expanded the platform to cover all aspects of infrastructure, hybrid infrastructure, on-prem, mobile, cloud, and then now containers as well, and providing a single platform that provides visibility for IT, security, and compliance as well. So happy to be out here today and talking about containers. So that's my quick intro.
Badri, how about you?
Hi, Mitch. My name is Badri Raghunathan. I'm a Director of Product Management on Summit Street at Qualys, and I focus on container security.
Excellent. Well, let's jump right into it. Now, Qualys in recent times here has really emphasized getting into the runtime environment, not just scanning externally from perimeters or a box that's on site. And, trying to get more into the application security, what's happening inside the stack, helping really security teams get a better handle on that as the software architectures change with cloud native and et cetera. You all had an announcement on the 4th of November, so not too long ago, just a little over a month. Tell us about your move into container security, whoever would like to go.
Yeah, so initially, I think about a couple of years ago, we moved into container security, but more from the aspect of hygiene, vulnerability configuration assessment, integrating in the CI/CD pipeline, helping what we call the prevention part, helping organizations ensure that they're not going out with vulnerabilities in images that they have. And then we made an acquisition, I think a couple of years ago, of a company called Layered Insight, which had a unique technology in terms of how to secure containers at runtime, right? So expanding from providing protection capabilities or prevention capabilities in the CI/CD pipeline to monitoring containers at runtime and actually being able to prevent access that doesn't meet policy guidelines, which, and this is very important today from container perspective because of the ephemeral nature of the containers, the speed at which containers are changing, more services are being added. And a lot of our customers kind of wanted to make the process be as short as possible, where they could provide policies for the containers that go with the container, whether it's a container that runs on-prem or whether it's a container that runs in the cloud or in some sort of a cloud container as a service. The idea being you can define what the behavior of a container should be and then enforce that the container at runtime is following that behavior. And that's really the announcement we did recently, is expanding that platform from being able to do prevention to actually getting into the runtime detection and then runtime protection as well.
Excellent. Badri, what's been the reaction? There's a lot of folks thinking and introducing products around container security. Oftentimes they're software stack kind of companies, you all being a well-established, well-known security company. I've worked with you guys since the early 2000s. You're coming at it from a customer base of security engineers, security staff. What's been the reaction of you taking it to the next level with container security?
It's been really refreshing because, like Sumit mentioned, we've been working on this for a while. We made the acquisition a while ago, like Sumit mentioned. We had integrated it into our platform. It's been in beta before, so we have customers using it, trying it out. And now what we had announced was general availability. So it's been refreshing talking about it publicly. From a security standpoint, there's a lot of talk in the industry now that hygiene alone is not sufficient, which is Sumit's point. And then now you need to care about the behavior of your running containers. Everybody will tell you containers are meant to be immutable, they should not drift. But the reality is quite different, right? Most companies are they're hamstrung to get through their containerization initiatives quickly. You've crammed big fat virtual machines into containers. There's a lot of stuff running in there. So what we are finding is that customers have implemented a container security program in place, and now they're thinking about securing the attack surface of running containers. So that's where a solution like what we've announced becomes helpful, where the security teams can actually specify policies. Each organization can say what's allowed, what's not allowed, You can actually say, do you want to allow things? Do you want to block things? Or I'm not comfortable blocking things. I actually want to just be alerted on it, depending on where you are in the continuum. But to answer your question, it's been very positive. The reaction overall, customers are looking for a holistic container security solution that goes across the entire cycle, both the hygiene piece that Sumit mentioned, as well as the runtime visibility and enforcement piece.
And I think if I can add to that, that there's an interesting nuance to the question that you asked also, Mitch, which is about the initial tools that were being leveraged by developers and development teams, right? Open source tools or things that they quickly brought on as they found on the internet. Certainly, one of the things that we noticed is that in the last 1 year or so, that's changed. The security teams are now getting a handle of the situation there and actually are getting embedded with the DevOps team so that they can define the policies, they can enforce those policies, and they are working very collaborative with the development team to ensure that the right policies are built in. And that's where our customers who obviously have been using Qualys for a very long time for security and for their auditors who know the Qualys brand from a security perspective, we're quite happy to have a strong security vendor like Qualys actually come up with a container security solution that they could put their stamp on, and they could leverage that rather than bringing something that was open source off the web. And auditors obviously they want to know that this is a solid tool, that you're not leveraging something that's not as strong. And so I think that was the other part of the reaction where people are quite happy, our customers, to say, okay, good, now I can actually go back to my auditors with a Qualys solution for containers, which they will be happy to accept.
It is a unique position to be in. I've thought for some time that part of our evolution and growth is that security people would need to become to understand software architecture more, cloud native more. Not that they need to be developers, but it's a different world than the old monolith architectures or even client server or others. But this seems like an I don't want to say easy, but an easier path to getting into that, because you obviously can extend a tool product that you already know very well built into your operational procedures and teams and notifications and processes. Now you're extending it into container security. I'm curious, how much do security engineers know the kind of things already that they want to set and monitor for behaviors or activities, versus how much of a learning curve is there, not specific to your product, but just in general, how much more is there to learn to really know how to instrument containers for a security team?
Yeah, I think the technologies have changed, but the developers are still the same, right? So I think some things don't change, by the nature of how things are developed quickly, fast. People are focused on.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Having been a developer myself, I've been on the dark side or on the light side. It depends on how you look at it. But I think that there is definitely a gap there, right? I think containerization technology is fantastic in terms of, because you are able to reduce things down to microservices. It simplifies the architecture for sure, right? So monolith applications are much harder to secure. So now here you kind of have microservices that are given defined roles, and you have these separate microservices that have individual roles. And so it's a little bit easier to define policies, right? To say, okay, this particular microservice is a web server, so it should behave like this, and this one is a database machine or a database cluster, it should behave like that. So that part has been simplified, but at the end of the day, when you put it something like that, just knowing every single thing that that particular service should and should not be doing is not easy, because things change, new releases come out. And that was one of the key elements for us to understand in the market right now, that there is that challenge still, where it's nice to say, here's, you can create a policy, but how do you help people figure out what the policy should be? So one of the very first things that we ensured in our solution was to make sure that we create a learning mode, right? We create an ability where you can put the container in a learning mode for a couple of weeks, and then the behavior that we observe, we log that, and that behavior can be just with a flip of a button be turned into a policy. So you say, look, for 2 weeks I observed, and this is my baseline behavior, and this is my policy. So now from this point on, anything that happens that's different, now we can say that this shouldn't have happened. This shouldn't be happening because it didn't happen for the last 2 months, 3 months. And so that's not normal behavior. And I think that's a very important point that you bring up, right? That you want to be able to figure out how to help to just define what's normal.
I remember the early days of vulnerability management, right? What's normal, what's not. And sounds like you've applied those lessons really well. Yeah. Badri, I'm curious about some of the unique or situations where you're well positioned, things like, file access monitoring, and we have network segmentation, all kinds of things that not necessarily software developers are going to think about that you might be even better positioned to help them with.
Sure. So overall, from a company standpoint, Qualys does operate in a number of those segments. On the host level, we do have things like file integrity monitoring solutions and so on, right? So customers trust and use Qualys for that. And they are looking for similar solutions on the container side. To Sumit's point, we make it really easy for customers to be able to use our learning mode and say you can profile your applications and auto-learn, auto-generate the rules that are needed there. But at the same time, as a security team, if you have specific business needs, regulatory compliance needs saying these particular workloads are actually running in a PCI environment, so there needs to be some kind of file access monitoring in place, we actually have out-of-the-box rules you can use to be able to meet those use cases. Or at the same time, if there's specific distros you're using and so on, you can write up those rules themselves. Qualys will help you those. So depending on the customer maturity and where they are in their security journey, we have all those options. You can auto-generate rules. We have rules out of the box. But yes, those are important use cases. Why customers are actually looking to leverage a runtime security solution. One is you want to lock down things, basically codify what's allowed and not allowed. And then from a business standpoint, you do want to monitor critical file access events like file integrity monitoring, or if you want to apply network segmentation policies saying don't allow a database container, like the example Sumit was saying, right? Don't allow this database container to talk on port 80 under any circumstances, right? So it really depends on the use case there that the customer is looking for. And to answer your question, we think Qualys is very well positioned to actually meet those needs, simply because not just of the policies themselves, but also the fact that the approach we've taken, which is security follows the image, that is agnostic to the container infrastructure you have. You could be a customer running Docker on-prem, you could be running Kubernetes on AWS, or you could be running in something like Fargate where there's no host level access, right? So we apply to all of these environments, and you can have one standard security solution that meets all of your needs from an infrastructure standpoint, as well as from a use case standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I would think too that just the fact that the security team is going to endorse a product that they're in a vendor, a company that they're used to working with, has got to also sort of, if we're shifting left, but we're also shifting right with the dev team now can, okay, great. If the security team is bought into this, buys into this, trusts it, et cetera, we're not having to convince them to like our open source tool or something else we want in our mix. I mean, is that something I would imagine you see that as well? Are you getting that kind of a reaction from the security teams?
Yeah, I think it is important that as the security team and the development team are coming together to deploy security in the architecture of the IT infrastructure as well, that the solutions also are something that can be deployed very well integrated through the CI/CD pipeline and be very frictionless, right? And I think that's something that is not a given in that sense, right? So being a security company that's well known, we still had to ensure that the use case for the open source solutions, which was that quick ability to get something integrated into the stack, was brought by the Qualys solution as well. So providing an extremely easy way to, spin up something, integrate that, use APIs to integrate the assessment capabilities into the pipeline were things that we had to bring to the market so that the security teams could take this to the development teams and integrate it in the workflow rather than what security has been in the past, which is all after the fact, right? And so that approach of instrumentation was pretty unique, right? The ability to say, you don't necessarily need to inject things all over the place. Once you've built your image, then Qualys can bring it through that pipeline. Qualys can now instrument that same image that has been certified with a little piece of Qualys code, and which, to Badri's point, which is important because now you don't need sidecar containers and privileged containers. You can just have the security go along with that particular image and have that container carry that security policy with it, no matter which infrastructure it runs on.
Is that typically something then that the dev team is going to do? They're going to go download the code to put in their containers, the runtime, if you will, part of the code, and then they'll build that into the pipeline. Is that generally how it works?
Badri, you want to take that?
Sure. So we see a couple of different approaches that customers would like to take, depending on the makeup of the organization. In the container world, typically what happens is the DevOps team are actually building what's called a base image. So Qualys does it ourselves for our microservices. You might build like a Debian or Ubuntu image. You would build a base image, and then the application teams would build on top, so that you're not managing 20 different versions of Ubuntu. So you would bake in the instrumentation into the base image itself. So that way the application teams don't have to think about it. They can just focus on building that particular applications. Or in certain cases where it's not possible to do this in the pipeline, for whatever reason, right? There's a lot of heterogeneity of build environments, for example, right? Then we offer an option where you can point the Qualys console to your registry of choice and basically say instrument all of these images, right? So then the developers do their thing, they build everything in the pipeline, they push it into the registry, and then they deploy everything from the registry. So there, what we focused on is, to your point, a seamless workflow for the developers, right? If you want to bake it into the pipeline, we have that option. Or if you want to do it from the registry as a control point, you can do that as well.
You had an interesting perspective on my question, which is actually why I was asking it, is trying to reduce the friction, the work, increase the acceptance of a product that may not be familiar with by the dev teams, but the security teams are bringing to them. Seems that the more you can do to just make it's there, you don't have to do anything, or it's relatively simple to put into the pipeline, the workflow process would make adoption much better.
Yeah, expanding that, there's two elements to that, right? One is just the ability to instrument and bring the security solution into the infrastructure itself is number one, right? And that's where the instrumentation solves that, as Badri said, right? If your low-level base image is instrumented, your development teams don't even need to know. They just grab that, they add their layers on it, and you're done. And then after that, you want the security team to have a frictionless approach towards being able to do the policies without having to go back to the development team and asking them to rebuild images and inject config files into the images, etc. So once the base instrumentation is done, the policy definition can be completely independently done by the security team on the Qualys platform without having to rebuild anything, right? So you can change the policies on the fly. You can say, oh, I got an exception. Now I'm going to allow these files to be accessed on these containers. Tomorrow you may decide, wow, I don't want this traffic that I'm seeing. I don't want this coming here. So that is another kind of aspect of, once the security team has the development team build in the instrumentation, then after that, they are completely free to define the security policies. And which is what every organization from a separation of duty wants to have, is they want the development team to develop things, and then they want the security team to be the one defining the policies, not the dev team themselves defining the policies.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You've obviously been testing this a lot with customers for a while. and before your GA. I'm curious, what kind of things did you learn either from customers, and I know you yourself made a heavy move into DevOps, some time ago. So you're not new to DevOps yourself inside of Qualys. What are some of the things that you learned in that beta GA process, maybe that you didn't expect, because you're kind of getting into containers in a different way than you've been before?
Yeah, I think that's right. The first thing that we did is implement this in our own pipelines, right? So one of the things, as we talked about last time as well, is Qualys is going through its own digital transformation. We've converted all of our older generation applications into microservices, containers, and we've been doing that and running that for a while. And so we worked on developing this in partnership with our internal security team and our dev teams. And I think the number one thing that we learned pretty quickly was, the question you asked earlier is can you help me create a baseline, right? It's nice to say, you can define the policy, but I need a baseline to define my policy. And that feature, then we moved quickly to add that capability in there to say that, let's add that so that we can provide the visibility first before you get into the enforcement. And then the second aspect was that just how can you make it, really easy and frictionless, so I'm not at every stage trying to add and inject things through the pipeline. So that ability to instrument early on in the base images was really an important thing for us.
Badri, anything to add from your perspective on that?
Yeah, there's one other element along the lines of what Sumedh was mentioning. When you go through assigning these policies, there are various options to doing it. And definitely the security teams are apprehensive about what kind of impact this might have on applications and so on, right? And Qualys has obviously fairly thoroughly tested it. So we've actually put in place knobs to help with the workflow around the policy tuning, right? So some examples, like to start with, you could assign a policy and then say, don't run this policy in enforcement mode. I want you to run it passively or silently so that I can monitor this in the backend and actually see what's going on. Once I'm comfortable with how it's working, that there's no application impact, if that's a concern for the customer, then I can actually put it in blocking mode, right? So we've actually had to change quite a few things as we've gone through the beta process with customers and gotten their feedback around how they would like this workflow to be around policy tuning, workflow, in case they want to turn something off. Being able to give them knobs so that they can do this very, very quickly is something is something that came up as part of the customer feedback process and that we've included in the product now.
Yeah, that's, again, kind of go back to our vulnerability management days. That's that tuning, right? Getting that right level of information versus information overload. We used to call IDS as barking dogs, right? There was just so much coming out of them, you didn't know what to look at. But you also don't want to miss things. You want to know when something important happens. So I'm curious what you're finding as you work with your customers, new and existing. What organizations tend to be at that point where they're ready to take on container security versus they're not ready to jump quite into doing something like runtime monitoring of them quite yet? What sort of some defining characteristics of security teams that have gotten to that point? Either one?
Yeah. I can take a quick shot at that. So we definitely see this as a pyramid, if you will, right? Where the foundation is around hygiene, like Sumedh mentioned. You want to have a comprehensive scanning program in place that's actually scanning across your pipeline. You're fixing vulnerabilities, misconfigurations. And once you've done that and you've reduced the attack surface of your container, at that point, it makes sense to actually put in place a runtime security offering in place. So to answer your question, these are organizations that already have a container security program in place. They've put in place scanning, and then they can round out the whole 9 yards and actually have a runtime security program in place. Beyond that, I would say, just given how widespread containerization is today, it is something any customer running containers should be looking at, right? But there's an order in which how you do things from a security standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's got to step into it, right, before you can jump in the deep end. One of the things I've always thought that security can bring to the table for DevOps teams is the tool chains that we have that DevOps teams may assemble when we start to introduce security tools into that. All that data that's being collected can be extremely helpful to get through audits and meet regulatory requirements. I mean, you're pulling a lot of information out of your real-time monitoring, runtime monitoring. Are there certain ways you found where the container security questions can be really important to answer for security teams when it comes to governance and audit?
Yeah, sure. There's some very interesting examples there, right? Qualys overall from a portfolio standpoint, what Sumit talked about at our QSC conference as well, is we start with inventory, right? We give you visibility of all of your inventory. So even if you have the Qualys scanner or the Qualys agent, even without our container sensor, you'll have visibility into how many container hosts are, right? So that by itself starts the security conversations around, gee, I didn't know I had 100,000 container hosts, right? So specifically as it relates to container security, beyond this, what we found is customers look at very simple things like, what are the top operating systems that are running inside my container images? Or it looks like I'm running these 10 different versions of operating systems. I have a golden image pipeline in place only for one of them, which means I'm managing 10 different versions for all the other ones. Let me put in place. So what we find is that it really helps customers with the visibility, helps them in understanding what they have, and then they can start their security journey in terms of securing it. Beyond that, to your point about metrics, there are probably way too many to mention there, but there are lots of examples like how many images are being pushed into production without actually making its way through the build pipeline, right? So a lot of these things, security is a journey, it is iterative, and the platform we have in place, the approach is it's about giving you visibility and then helping you through that journey in terms of iterating on that.
It seems like having the insight into what's happening also lets you sort of get a handle on drift. You know, what something starts out as a container's doing X, well, 6 months later, 12 months later, it's now doing 4 more things. Nobody knew about it when we first put it out, and maybe we're still scanning it for preventative measures. But you know, things evolve and change, and that runtime aspect has to be extremely helpful to know what's different, what's changed, what's it doing now.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to add that you kind of need both those things, right? That there are two sides of the same coin. Ultimately, you want to reduce anything that you can upfront, but then not necessary that some misconfigurations can be actually detected and found upfront in the CI/CD pipeline, right? And so that's where that runtime piece is important. That you know, or you may have something very nuanced, right? You may want to be able to provide access to a certain file only to a certain process at runtime, but not another process, and so that you cannot really scan as a vulnerability or a misconfiguration early on in the pipeline. So I think that is helping definitely to say, look, we're going to provide you the journey of that service all the way from the first time it was compiled, what vulnerabilities, misconfigurations did it have, all the way through at runtime, what kind of access is it making, what connections is it making, what files is it accessing. So you have that visibility across the board.
Great. Were you going to jump into Badri?
No, I was going to echo some of the same points there.
Okay, very good. Well, hey, we're kind of short on time here. We're nearing the end of our time together. So I assume folks can go to the Qualys site, of course, to find out more about container security and talk to the appropriate person that can help them get started on that journey. So, you know, appreciate getting together with both of you again and catching up on what's happening at Qualys and really interesting things. Yeah, I do think it's in a world where you're offering a network security solution to software helps security teams a great So thanks to you both for being here, both Sumedh and Badri, and to your team at Qualys for getting us together. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure, Mitch. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you, Mitch.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right. That's all we have for today's episode of TechStrong TV. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Tune in on Monday for a new episode of TechStrong TV. We'll have a whole new lineup of interviews and conversations that are totally worth your time. So please join us then. Until then, have a great weekend, everybody. And please, as always, stay safe.